Generally, making a picture, for me at least, I find is kind of a series of misadventures and then trying to put everything together. So I use very few colours because that's easier to manage, and tend to search for the right colour as I paint. So beginning by looking for a tone and then mixing it on the canvas is really the only way to discover the picture. So it involves a lot of working over and making corrections, making mistakes continually, and then finding out ways to deal with those mistakes to correct them. This picture is a portrait of a woman who lives nearby, but the actual subject of the painting was the character of Miss Havisham from Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, which I always found was a fascinating character, someone with a deep bitterness and a complex psychology, which draws me to the idea of trying to explore that psychology. And I feel the best way to, or a very good way to doing that, is to use somebody, a living being who is familiar to me, and try to find any common ground in their face, in their eyes, with the character that I'm looking to depict. And so this woman is actually a lot more balanced and friendly than Miss Havisham, does, like us all, have some shadows of Miss Havisham in her. So the painting was really an attempt to associate her with that character and to understand the psychology of anger and bitterness at certain elements. I feel very pleased, I should say, with the process of making a picture of that kind, which has become more and more familiar to me in recent times. The process of creating a face and trying to depict a story around that face. I find that the technicalities of painting kind of tend to come together when the subject of the picture is more intense and understood, because then it's just a question of using all of the technical elements which one has learned over time to reach a certain aim. And when that aim is in your mind, then it's much easier to find the necessary instruments to reach that aim. So this painting of Miss Havisham is really, I suppose, far more loose than many other pictures I've done before, because I felt the expression, the eyes and the mouth were the main focuses of the picture and had a lot to do with what I was thinking of the character. I grew up living in various cities in England, born in London, but I think I ended up living in Newcastle and Hull, Warrington as well, which I think was the last straw before coming to Italy. So I'd met some Italians in London, and that seemed like a logical place to try and explore, and so I applied for work with the Salvation Army, which is an organisation that also has interests in Rome, in specifically a hostel for the homeless, which is where I initially went to work. This is in 1995, I believe I arrived. And it was, for me, a drastic change in lifestyle. I found in Italy a very vibrant, outgoing society, people friendly and welcoming, and so I think what I today, 20 years later, consider a great sea change in the way that I live and see life. So from there, while I was in Rome, I began to paint. I'd already studied painting in London. I began to paint watercolours around the city. And from there, people began approaching me as I was painting and commissioning pictures for themselves of the various fountains and squares around Rome. And quite quickly, the clientele began to build up until I was able to earn a meagre living by painting watercolours of the sights of Rome. So from there, I suppose it's been quite a gradual build-up to today, which I'm very pleased with. At a certain point, I'd say it's about 3 years after I'd arrived in Rome, maybe 4. Around 1999, I met an antique dealer who lived in the area where I was making paintings by the name of Carlo Sestieri, and he was very encouraging and kind, and he also has a exhibition space in Rome in the ghetto area, and he almost immediately said to me, "I like your paintings, I think you should have an exhibition of your own," which I hadn't had until then. And when I replied that no, every painting I do is to sell, to pay for food or pay for the bills, then he replied that he would finance the preparation of enough paintings to make an exhibition. So I'm always been grateful to him since he did just that, and 6 months later I had my first exhibition, which then led to many other opportunities, and so I can't express enough how grateful for that generosity I am to Carlos Estieri. That was in 1999. The exhibition was a great success, probably because of all of the connections offered by the Sestieri, and so it was practically sold out, and many of the people who did buy pictures then became long-term clients. I had another exhibition a year later, which also went well, and so that was a kind of a foundation, and then something which helped me to feel confident in following this career path. It was not long afterwards, in 2001, that I decided to leave Rome. Up until then, I'd been living in the city. And so I moved out to the countryside north of Rome to a small town called Caravaggio, which is not far from Viterbo. I'd always lived in the city, even in England. I'd lived in cities, London and various other northern cities. And so living in a small village with countryside all around me was quite interesting and pleasant experience. I'd suddenly just discover nature and the freshness of the air in the countryside. Really, since then, I've lived outside of Rome. 2 years after that, I moved to Civita Castellana, which is where I live now, and have been for over 10 years. So it's somewhere which has definitely become home. In that period, I think the way I conceive of painting, the way I work, has changed a great deal. I started off, as I said, painting watercolours, but quite quickly moved on to different supports, going oil painting on paper, then on panel, on canvas, until I discovered the pleasure of painting on copper, which I have been doing for the last, 8 years or so. Coming out of Rome, coming to first Caravaggio, then Cibo di Castellana, ran, I suppose, parallel to various changes in the way I see painting. I think probably I'd have to say I've always been interested in stories and people, although coming to Italy and beginning to paint, the most obvious thing to do was to paint street scenes, paint landscapes. Although I think it was never as strongly felt for me as portrait painting. On the other hand, that was what I could sell, and that was what seemed to be popular. And so I suppose over the last 10 years or so, it's been a gradual change and a gradual sense of confidence in being able to move more towards the kind of paintings that I feel more interested in. So from scenes of Rome, church interiors, which I was doing and enjoying to a certain extent, to things which I feel much more interested in, which is the research and the study of stories which usually have been connected to mythology, biblical stories, and then trying to transpose them to modern times. So the recent, I suppose the last 2 or 3 exhibitions I've had over the last couple of years have tended to concentrate more on the figure, paintings of people I know, paintings of people around me who were depicted as modern day versions of Salome, Herod, Miss Havisham, various other historical figures, which gives me the opportunity to interact with the people that I'm painting, and I feel that has constituted a evolution for me from what I was doing when I first arrived in Italy down to today, where I feel more satisfied. 8 or 9 years ago, I was offered a job in Rome teaching drawing to study abroad students, so usually the vast majority are Americans. And so this teaching job involved generally, apart from the obvious of teaching basic drawing techniques, taking the students around Rome to various sites and getting to use the drawings they were making in their sketchbooks to understand the history of the monuments they were looking at. And that was very useful to me as well. It kind of enhanced my interest in the history of Rome and the way that you can study apparently insignificant symbols and forms that you see around you on the facade of churches, in the decoration of ancient Roman monuments, and build up a vocabulary of those signs and symbols, and which give you the satisfying and deep understanding, or at least deep interest in the history and how history is accumulated in front of us. So I'd say that approach, which was enhanced by teaching and enhanced by the feedback of many of the students that I've been teaching, who are often proved to be curious and intelligent. So that approach has been for me a very enriching experience, and helped me to appreciate the benefits of observation. So naturally the task of teaching others forces you to find the words to explain various approaches and techniques. which when you're doing it on your own, you tend not to need to do. You just go ahead and find your own way of creating pictures and looking at them. So that's another thing that's been very useful, is having to put into words various processes, both technical and more, let's say, philosophical, about capturing the world around you on a piece of paper or a canvas. So in many ways, I think that those experiences have been extremely useful. Naturally, living in a city like Rome, and later on when I moved away, having just direct access to Rome has, to me, been fundamental. It's a city which has been at the heart of history and at the heart of artistic creation for so many centuries, and so there's an unending supply of inspiration and an unending supply of examples of great artists to look towards and to try to take some kind of advice from across the centuries. Be hard to actually pick out great artists I'd consider the greatest, because there are so many. I've always admired Flemish painters personally, but that's because it's very connected to my own attraction towards meticulous way of painting pictures. I usually paint on a very small scale and tend to use very small brushes and tend to be very close to the picture surface. And so the intricacy and the meticulous nature of Flemish painting has always attracted me. Lately, I'd say, as I've drawn closer to the idea of concentrating on the human figure, then I found a great deal more appreciation of Caravaggio's paintings and the circle of Caravaggio, which was so popular that today practically whatever church you go into in Rome or museum, then you'll find something by someone who's using Caravaggio's very distinct style of chiaroscuro, of this sharp contrast between light and dark. And that is very useful to someone who is trying to understand how to create images with an impact. Caravaggio tended to use one very strong source of light, usually from a window high up in the room. So his figures were illuminated on one side, where the rest of the figure and the background were cast in shadow, and so you get this very strong, dramatic effect. I think the understanding that, as well as the dynamics that he used and the composition that he used in his paintings, are, in a way, they're quite, once you look at the paintings, they're fairly simple to understand, but very complex and difficult to put into action. I suppose if they weren't, then Caravaggio wouldn't be considered so unique in the way that he did that so well. But the privilege of being able to walk into Rome, go into a church, stand for 10 minutes in front of a great painting and study it, and then walk on, have an ice cream, go into another church, is something very precious for someone interested in the pursuit of making images. If I were to ask myself and reply seriously to the question of why I've decided to take up this career to paint, many of the reasons would be quite mundane. I think initially it seemed like the only thing I'd knew how to do and was quite easy. I probably, if when I left school, I'd have found another job, and I may have found myself doing something completely different with my life. In a way, it was initial failures in life which left the field clear to take on such a solitary pursuit. And coupled with that, I suppose painting is a very good way to obtain recognition, or at least some form of interest from others. It's one of the easiest ways, and so I'd imagine that we all, to some extent, are open to the temptation of wishing others to like us and to say good things about us. And I think much of the wish to paint pictures and to impress others is very stimulating, and at least to, let's say, to communicate with others. The idea of creating works of art which others respond to in some way is a great deal of the interest. And then there's naturally the ambitious area, the dream which I suppose most painters or artists of any form would have to admit to, which is the dream of rising to the heights of fame, standing on the summit of the hill of their particular art form. Very few of them will ever do such a thing, but it's a dream which keeps you going. It's a dream which you continue to feed, say, whether you believe in it or not. And so I'd say that the need for recognition, ambition are almost as much a part of the underlying reasons for following a career like painting, as are the wish to explore human nature and to understand the very technical elements of the making of pictures. They all come together and feed each other, but it's a very complex urge, I believe.